Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's so lovely to have you here at our first webinar of this academic year. And it's our 41st webinar since we started this series in September 2020. And it's really great to have you here to kickstart another academic year. I'm Sarah Bullock, and I work at the CAQDAS networking project at the University of Surrey, in Guildford in the UK. And with me today is Christina Silva, who is the director of the CAQDAS networking project and is our speaker for today. Before we get started, I just wanted to highlight some training that we have scheduled for the next couple of months. We now run half-day courses, one-day courses, and two-day courses in a range of computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software, but also a range of methods training courses. So do have a look at our website for those, and I will share the link to that in the chat shortly. We've also got some more webinars coming up. The next of these is in October. We're always really keen to hear from potential contributors to the webinar series. So if you'd like to showcase your work and you think that this might be the right platform to do that, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us, and we'd really love to hear from you. All our webinars are recorded, and you're going to be sent a link to the recording of this one. And you can also access all the recordings of previous webinars on our YouTube channel as well. And I'll share those links in the chat in a minute as well. So without further ado, let's move on to our speaker and our topic for today. Christina Silva, who many of you will know, runs the CAQDAS networking project at the University of Surrey. She's also the director of Qualitative Data Analysis Services, and her passion for facilitating others in their use of digital tools for qualitative and mixed analyses is evident in her many publications on these topics. Recently, Christina has been sharing her thoughts on the interplay between AI technologies and other digital tools for research through a range of blog posts. And today she's going to draw on those, speaking to the title, What is Occurring in the Qualitative AI Space? Hoo-ha or Step Change? She also has a number of other exciting platforms coming up where she's going to be building on what she says today, along with other colleagues and collaborators. But I'll let her say a bit more about that in a few minutes. Whilst Christina's speaking today, please do post any questions or comments that you've got in the chat, and she'll get to those at the end of the webinar. I'm not going to be staying for the whole of the session today, unfortunately, but I will leave you in Christina's eminently capable hands, and I hope that you have a really lovely session today. And I look forward to watching the recording myself as soon as it's available. So without further ado, Christina, I'm going to pass over to you. Have a lovely time, everyone, and enjoy the webinar.
Thanks, Sarah. That's great. I'm just going to take over screen control. So you should hopefully now be able to see the first slide. Fabulous. Okay, so I'm just going to start off saying a little bit about why this webinar today. And as Sarah mentioned, I have been writing a few blog posts over the last few months on these topics, and I'll share the link to those with you in a moment. And I just wanted to open up the discussion based on some of those writings, those musings of mine and experimentations that I've been undertaking. And rather than today focus on the specifics of what's possible, it's not a teaching session. There are many other places where you can access the actual tools and experiment with using the tools. But today, really, I wanted to put some of those tools that we are discussing in detail at the moment in a kind of broader context, both a historical context and a tools and methods-based context, so that we can sort of raise some issues, some challenges, some dilemmas, some opportunities, and start discussing those in that broader context. And also I wanted to be able to seek views and opinions from others. And to that end, I am now going to put into the chat, you should be able to see the Zoom meeting chat at the bottom of your Zoom screen, hopefully. And there is a link in there to, I think, just 3 questions, just to get a sense of what your current thinking is about these topics. And I will let you answer those, and then we'll have a look at those together in a moment. Okay, so moving on, you can see there the link to the series of blog posts that I mentioned, and I will put that link in the chat also. You cannot access the form. Really? That's a first failure. You should be able to access the form.
We can see your screen where you're dealing with the
that's because I've done the settings wrong, sorry.
Responses.
What responses?
Yeah.
Why does it do it by default to restrict?
I don't know.
It's so annoying.
Indeed.
Apologies, I've done this like 63,000 times, but still always forget. So I'm now going to put it back in the chat. Maybe the same link will work again, but here it is again. Try that one. I'll just continue and someone will let me know whether it's working or not. Apologies for that. Okay, so also in the chat is the link to the series of blog posts. So what we're going to be discussing today are the opinions. So seeking some of your opinions in those few little questions. I'm going to say a few things about the history of AI in qualitative data analysis, talk about the developments that are occurring at the moment, which is where the kind of hoo-ha may be coming from, and then raise a few implications and have a discussion about some of these things. Okay, so let's just start also by speaking to something that Sarah mentioned in the introduction about some other events on qualitative AI that you may be interested in tapping into. Very shortly, on the 12th and 13th of September, Dr. Susanna Fries, who I think might be here today, is doing an online workshop where you can have some experience with actually using these tools. So that will be something to tap into. If I just click on there, we can go to her website here, and you'll see it's a 2-day workshop diving into a range of different tools and actually using them and discussing their use. So that's something that some of you might be interested in, and I'll be there on the 2nd of those days, on the 13th. And then also the CAQDAS networking project, myself and Sarah, together with the UK-based Social Research Association, are also in the process of organising a 2-part symposium, which will be entirely free and online. Part 1 is on the 24th of November and part 2 is on the 1st of December. And we will be inviting developers of these AI tools, researchers who've used them, and methodologists who think about them to share with you experiences and issues around that. So quite a lot there for you to tap into beyond today. All right, so let's just have a quick look at the answers to your questions. Okay, main reasons for being here today: curious to find out more, the vast majority. A couple of people are concerned about the developments and want to discuss them. That's quite common in my experience. Have you used these tools before? Half of those of you who've answered have played with the tools but not used them in a real analysis. 1 or 2 have used them in a real analysis. Be really interested to hear your experiences around that. Characterizing your feelings about the use of AI. Curiously optimistic, around half of us. Skeptical but open-minded. Super excited. Okay, nobody very concerned, but there is some skepticism. Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you very much for taking the time to do that. All right, so let's get on and talk a little bit about history. So one of the reasons that I started the blog series that I mentioned is because it became evident to me at the beginning of this year, maybe the end of last year, when generative AI came into this space and qualitative researchers started to debate those tools, that there was this kind of idea that this was a completely new thing to our field. And I just want to make the point that actually qualitative software, CAQDAS packages, there's actually a relatively long history of the use of AI in those tools. So although generative AI is new, AI itself and its infiltration into our field of practice in terms of technology isn't new. And I think it's worth making that point. So I'm going to say a little bit about that first off, and highlight to you a few tools that have been using AI for a while. And I also want to kind of contextualize that within the idea of the debate around the use of tools for qualitative analysis. So computer-assisted qualitative data analysis as a field and as a genre of technology has been around for more than 30 years now. And there's been debate about the relationship between methods and tools ever since the outset. And if you're interested in that debate is kind of being given a new sort of lease of life at the moment with generative AI and all of these discussions that we're here to think about today. But rather than going back to those early debates, the early debates sometimes were quite divisive, and obviously because they're 30 years old are not really relevant so much anymore because technology has moved on quite a lot. But there is an article by Christy Jackson and colleagues in 2018 which talks about the context of unsubstantiated criticisms around the use of tools for this. So that would be something that would be interesting to look back at now in the context of what's going on. And the full reference is on the last of my slides. Okay, so let's think a little bit about the tools and AI pre-generative AI. So the first tool I want to talk about is Qualrus. Qualrus was the first intelligent CAQDAS. Unfortunately, it's no longer available, and the website's not even available anymore either. When I wrote the first blog post in, I can't remember when it was, March maybe, the website was still there because Professor Ed Brent, who was based at the University of Missouri, when he and colleagues developed Qualrus, they had other tools as well, which were still available, but the website's no longer working, I noticed yesterday, so I'm not completely sure what's happened to that. But anyway, Qualrus itself was available from 2002, okay, which was 15 years into CAQDAS, so halfway, so half of those 30 years, we've had some kind of AI available in some of our tools. And what was unique about Qualrus was that amongst other things, Qualrus was able to suggest codes to us based on patterns in qualitative data. So that was using natural language understanding, case-based reasoning, and also some aspects of machine learning. So the suggestions that were made by the program could be accepted or rejected by the human researcher, and then the program would learn based on those decisions. And then subsequent suggested codes would be affected by the rejection or acceptance of the previous suggestions. Okay, so this is not dissimilar to some of the things that we're seeing coming up in some tools now. This is a very old screenshot showing you a little bit about what that looked like. And you would select a passage of text that you might want to code, qualitative text, and the program would look at those words, the patterns, the language being used, and suggest codes, and you could choose them or not. And you can also choose other codes. So if you wanted to code it to something that wasn't suggested, you could as well. So you had quite a lot of flexibility in terms of integrating your own human-based interpretive coding and accepting or rejecting the suggestions from Qualrus. So that was the initial use. There were a few other things going on in Qualrus, but that was what I wanted to highlight right now. Next up are a series or a suite of text analysis tools provided by Pravalas Research, who are based in Canada, and the CEO is Norman Belledoux. And there are 3 core tools that you can use separately or in conjunction with one another. The 2 that I'm going to focus on today are QDA Miner, which is the qualitative module, and WordStat, which is content analysis and text mining. And across those tools, there are a plethora of different AI capabilities. Here are a few of them with the dates when they became available. So a combination of unsupervised and supervised machine learning tools that have been available in these tools for a long time as well. So without going into all of the details of exactly how they work, you can access some really useful. This link here is just a search I did on their website for the word machine learning, and it comes up with lots of blog posts and resources and discussions and explanations of how these tools work based on Pravalas suite of programs. And there's also a webinar that Norman gave a couple of years ago now, talking about sentiment analysis. So if you're interested in those tools, then there's quite a lot out there for you to access. Then we've also got Leximancer, which is automatic content analysis and concept mapping software. And that's been around also for a while, developed by Andrew Smith and Michael Humphreys, initially at the University of Queensland in Australia. And this is unsupervised machine learning, looking at text mining and content analysis. And the program will very quickly, in fact, generate models of texts based on the occurrence of concepts and allow you to access those in context using a range of natural language processing techniques. And this is the sort of visualization that you can generate out of Leximancer. And again, if you're interested in that tool, then there is a webinar that Andrew gave. When was it? Last year only. That you might want to look into. So those are 3 of those historical contexts in terms of software programs harnessing AI. And then finally, I want to just mention Discovertext, which was developed by Dr. Stu Schulman, initially on a funded project and subsequently through his company. And that's been available since 2009, although it was previously to that, he developed the Coding Analysis Toolkit from 2007. And what's slightly different about this is that embedded in the way that Discovertext works is the idea that the human and the computer most powerfully work together. Okay, so there's a sort of what he calls an active learning loop between the researcher and the computer. So there's a continual dialect's not the right word, is there? Backwards and forwards between those two. So basically, simplified idea of the process. Initially, humans do some coding, ideally collaboratively, so groups of humans do coding, and that is adjudicated by humans, and then the results of that is used to train a machine classifier that then codes further data. And you can go through various iterations of that active learning loop, so that both the humans and the machine get better at what they're doing. So this employs various AI techniques, topic modeling, sentiment detection, duplicate detection, etc. And what's actually useful for many of you to know is that it's free to academics at the moment. And here's a screenshot showing you a few of the steps based on that adjudication process. And that adjudication process is kind of core and one of the unique features of Discovertext. And again, there's a webinar. Stu gave a webinar. In fact, I think it was our very first webinar, or maybe our second one, back in 2020. Where he talks about that working together of the human and machine. And there's also a podcast episode that I did with him recently where he talks about that. Okay, so just a little bit of historical context, which I think it's really important to be aware of in our thinking about what's going on at the moment, which is the harnessing of generative AI capabilities in qualitative research, so that we can kind of contrast what's going on now and all of the excitement and caution that we're seeing in the backdrop of the idea that actually AI generally in qualitative data analysis isn't new. Okay, so current developments can be broadly distinguished between two areas: automated transcription and generative AI. I'm going to focus on generative AI today, but I just wanted to say something about automated transcription because this field has changed dramatically over the last few years. It used to be that many of us would say the time taken to correct a transcript that has been automatically generated is more than it would take you to actually do it yourself, but that's no longer the case. And as I'm sure many of you are aware, there are a multitude of standalone products. Otter AI, Zoom will generate a transcript, all kinds of things like that. And those kinds of standalone products can sometimes be automatically or semi-automatically formatted for the importation into a qualitative software program. But CAQDAS products themselves are also, some of them developing their own automated transcription. NVivo Transcribe has been available for a while. That's a separate technology from NVivo itself, so it's not inside the NVivo software, as it were, but there is of course a link. Those transcripts that you generate via NVivo's auto transcription tool will be formatted in a way that NVivo can handle. And Qualrus and Lexana more recently, in the last 6 months, both of them have integrated automatic transcription into their products using two different technologies. Qualrus uses Whisper and Lexana uses Speechmatics. So the difference between those is that they're integrated into the program rather than NVivo not being. And that does, the widespread availability and also the much better more accurate generation of those transcripts does change the way that we think about using those tools. There's also a webinar on that topic given by Daniel Turner, actually in Qualrus. I haven't got the link, but I'll find it for you later. And I know that there's others of you here today who will have lots to say about that. But let's move on to generative AI. So that's kind of what's happening at the moment. And where this idea of hoo-ha comes from. And in my mind, there are kind of three genres of newer qualitative AI tools that harness generative AI in various ways. So first of all, the use of chatbot tools alongside other tools or instead of them, the integration of generative AI into established CAQDAS programs, and then the development of a whole new set of apps which are harnessing those capabilities separate from what's been happening in this field for many years already. So I'm just going to make a few comments about those three genres. So first of all, the use of chatbots for QDA. So I'm talking about ChatGPT, Bard, and those kinds of technologies. And first of all, I just want to point you to this article by Mellon et al. Again, the reference is in my slides at the end, who are talking about using large language models for analyzing open-ended survey responses. And that is work that they were doing before ChatGPT became widely available to the public on the global stage that it did recently. So that's definitely worth checking out if you're interested in how these technologies are being harnessed in academic settings. And I think it's important to kind of make that distinction between the use of these kind of technologies in a more kind of business commercial context and a more kind of academic applied research context. And it's a sort of academic applied research context I want to focus on today. So apart from that article, there's a couple of colleagues who have made fairly early on this year some comments about how these kinds of technologies can be used. So Philip Adu talks about in his YouTube channel and other resources that he's generated since about using ChatGPT as a precursor to analysis. He's an NVivo user and trainer, and he talks about thinking about how it can be helpful as an early initial stage before more formal analysis happens in a qualitative software program. And then similarly, but slightly more extended, Andreas Müller, who's a MaxQDA user and trainer, talks about multiple uses of ChatGPT, and that is a little YouTube video as well, talking about generating ideas for codes and developing definitions as well as summarization. So those are some three resources which I think are well worth checking out in more detail if you're interested. So let's move away from that and think about how generative AI is being integrated into established CAQDAS programs. And the two key ones here are Atlas TI and MaxQDA. I will start off talking about Atlas TI. Atlas TI initially implemented what they first of all called AI open coding. I think they've changed the name and just call it AI coding now. But that would just look at your text, interview transcripts or whatever the text was, and code those transcripts. They subsequently developed AI summaries and code suggestions, which is currently available in the web-based version of Atlas TI. So the open coding or the AI coding generates a large number of codes that you can then review and accept and reject. So a bit different from what I described with Qualrus, in that Qualrus, it was suggesting codes as you went through the coding process. Atlas TI, it would look at your text and suggest codes for segments of data, quotations they're called in Atlas TI, across everything, and then you would retrospectively view that and decide whether you wanted to accept them or not. That technology has improved over time, but it does generate a large number of codes, and that may or may not be what you need. The AI summaries works on documents or codes that have already been applied to text. So on documents, you could say, okay, maybe for a literature review or something, you could say, okay, summarize this one document or these multiple documents. Or if you've already done some coding, however that coding's been done, you can say, okay, please summarize the segments that have been coded here. And the AI code suggestions, again, only in the web version at the moment, but suggest new or existing codes based on selections of text. So very, very similar to what Qualrus was doing all those years ago. Max QDA started off with the summarization of coded segments. So the first implementation was on that basis. And that meant that you did the coding yourself first, and then you said, okay, now summarize the segments that are at this code. And you can get those summaries in various different formats, various different lengths, and various different displays. Subsequent to that, you can summarize text passages. So rather than a whole document or a number of documents, you select text. So you could just select a part of a document, a paragraph within a report, for example. And also it will suggest subcode. So it won't do the coding, but you can ask it to suggest subcodes based on a top level code. And one really neat, I think, application of that is when you're working with, let's say, survey type data. You've got free text responses to open questions in a survey. And if you brought those in from a spreadsheet or something, then they will already be coded. So you'll have one code which has everybody's answer to an open question. How are you feeling today? And then you can ask it to look at those responses and suggest potential subcodes. It won't do the coding for you. It will suggest the subcodes, and then you can use those as you see fit. So there are some similarities in how Atlas TI and Max QDA are harnessing generative AI, but also some quite significant differences in the way that they've implemented the technology, which I think raises some interesting methodological considerations. Okay, then finally, the third genre are new apps, so new products which are harnessing generative AI. And as I mentioned earlier, there are a plethora of options, particularly in the kind of business sector, that could be adapted for our more academic and applied research purposes. But there are also some that have been specifically developed for qualitative research. That might be qualitative market research or qualitative academic research. And those are the ones that I'm going to talk about today, and just mention three. I'm going to focus mainly on CoLoop because that's the one that I know and have experimented with myself. The other two on this list, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. I don't know if Suzanne is here, but the workshop I mentioned earlier that Susanna Fries is organising in a couple of weeks is going to focus on AI lies or A lies. I don't know.
Christina, and I would say it's AI lies, but I don't know better than you.
Okay, AI lies. It'll be interested to hear from them because they're coming along.
Jack will be there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Okay. So AI lies, we'll call it for now until we're told otherwise. And Cody are both developed by researchers. Okay. And you can find out a lot more about those in that workshop. And maybe Suzanne, later at the end of the session, you can say something more about those. So for today, I'll just talk about CoLoop, which is developed in the UK. This does a number of things. First of all, automated transcription. So I can upload a video or an audio file into the platform and it will automatically transcribe it. Its kind of initial development was based on conversational type data. So interviews, one-to-one interviews or focus group transcripts. So it will automatically identify speakers as well. And then as a second automatic step, once that's happened, it will summarize each transcript. So you'll get the long, full verbatim transcript of an interview, say, and then you'll also get a shorter summary. And then you have an analysis grid where you can ask comparative questions, and also a more standardized, what we know from kind of ChatGPT and Bard type technologies of AI chat. And that's the what's called the AI Copilot. So I'm just going to click on here, which takes us to my blog post on Coloop, so that I can show you a few things. So this is a screenshot. I know you can't see it perfectly, but you can go to the actual website and see it in more detail later on. Let me just make it a little bit bigger. But here is a transcript. This is actually of a podcast I did, that podcast I mentioned earlier with Stu Schulman. So this is the transcript, and this is the summarization of it, and it's pretty accurate. Only really technical terms did it get wrong. And so the cleaning up afterwards is very, very quick and easy. Again, this is what the analysis grid looks like. So this is a different project. This is some of my PhD data that I know very well. And you ask questions, and then it gives you the answers below, using extracts of your materials to answer those questions. And then you can chat in a more traditional way, I suppose. And again, you can ask more in-depth questions and have that conversation, and you can access the qualitative material from the summary and as it goes on. So that just gives you an idea of what that tool is doing. Okay. So that's a pretty high level overview of some history and current developments. And all of the tools that I've mentioned today have got, apart from Qualrus, have got various resources available online when you can find out a lot more. And many of them, for example, MaxQDA and Atlas TI, they're running their own webinars very frequently on the use of their AI tools, as well as other tools. I think there was one yesterday on MaxQDA and the most recent adaptations, and these are being developed continually. So the field is changing as we speak. So it's something to really be keeping on top of if you're going to actually use them in your own research. And that's what I want to move on to now, and just raise a few questions, answering the question, what are these generative AI tools good for? And for me, there are two key things. So first of all, familiarization, and secondly, codebook development. And the answer to that question I give in relation to Atlas TI, MaxQDA, and Coloop on my blogs. But in terms of familiarization, I can definitely see for many projects, especially if you haven't collected the data yourself, that they can really help with familiarization. So get a quick overview to inform your thinking about what's going on in the materials. And that's all, that's a very common initial step in all qualitative methods. The way that it works in these tools may be more useful for certain types of data. So more naturally occurring data, secondary data, more useful probably than primary data. If I've gone out and I've collected data myself through interviews, observations, focus groups, whatever, I'm probably fairly familiar with the data anyway. Whereas if I'm doing secondary analysis or harvesting data in various other ways, and I don't have that overview, then these tools are really useful for that. I found in my own experimentations, and I'd be really interested to hear what others think, that these kinds of ways of using, so we're talking about the summarization tools here, are more useful when we focus it on subsets of data rather than just across everything that I've got. So thinking about, I don't know, if you've got data from different locations or different participants with different characteristics, then focusing on those subsets can be more meaningful in terms of your familiarization process than just doing it boom across everything very quickly. And it's also really important, I think, to think about evaluating the role of the automatic coding and the summaries for familiarization. So thinking about those two different ways of using these technologies, and which may be most useful for your particular application. And it's like most of these tools, it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. So familiarization, I think it has a place in certain contexts. Codebook development, I can see that getting the tool to suggest codes in various different ways can add a layer to the way that I might think about the data, particularly highlighting things that I may have missed, and thinking about doing that both upfront and as coding can happen. I can see that that can add rigor in our process in various different ways. So I definitely think that they have their place in some contexts, but not all. Okay, so let's move on to some implications. So the most recent of my posts in this series is all about these sorts of implications. And I speak to these 6 topics. So in terms of thinking about evaluating the use of qualitative AI in our process, the answer to whether it's useful or not will be dependent on the type of qualitative research that you're doing, the units of data from which insight is generated, when the assistance happens, the kind of intelligence that we want and need, how transparent the tools are, and the really important issue about ethics and potential dangers. So I'm going to very briefly make a few comments about these, and then I'm going to stop talking and open it up for discussion. So first of all, what type of qualitative research you're doing, whether these tools are relevant, any of them, not just the generative ones, are to do with your project. Okay, so qualitative research generally and qualitative data analysis specifically are not homogeneous. There's a huge diversity in purpose, the materials we use, the techniques we employ, the requirements we have. And I like to think about that in terms of a methodological spectrum. Now, I'm not going to talk about this slide because if you're interested in thinking about the spectrum and how this works, then my previous webinar spoke about this in the context of reflexivity. But qualitative research is happening, or qualitative data is being used across this methodological spectrum. So where you sit and the project that you're currently working towards sits on this spectrum has a huge effect on how you will think about the use of tools generally and these tools specifically. So again, it's not a one answer. These tools can definitely be appropriate in some contexts and definitely won't be in other contexts. All right, secondly, the units of data. Okay, so the unit of data is the size of the chunk of text that is being used to generate insight or meaning. And in these generative AI tools, it tends to be sentences and paragraphs to choose from. And that's what the AI uses to determine what's going on. Okay. Now, at the moment, and things may have changed, but the last time I looked, you could choose one or the other. But in many data, what is a coherent unit in your materials may vary from materials. So if you've got a project when you're working with lots of different types of qualitative data, for one set of qualitative data, a coherent meaning unit might be different from in another. And the units that the AI tools are using may not be the meaningful units for your data. So especially in conversational type of material, I might want something bigger than a sentence or a paragraph. So blanket choices for such data may be less useful than other types of data. And I think that's a really important issue to consider. Secondly is when the assistance happens. Now, this is changing in tools all the time, but basically, does the assistance happen first and then we as the humans correct or adjust it afterwards? Does the human coding come first and then the AI summarizes it after? Or is there that oscillating sequencing? And these comments I'm making here are based on how these tools initially implemented the generative AI. So Atlas TI and Coloop, initially when they first implemented these, the program did its thing, and then we looked at it and decided whether it was useful or not. Okay, so that's an example of assistance first, human correction after. CAQDA started off their implementation completely the other way around. So initially its AI assist tool was happening after coding had been done, and then it was summarizing the coding. And as I mentioned earlier with Discovertext, there's that oscillating sequencing. Now, as CAQDA and Atlas TI have developed, then they have enabled it to happen in various different ways. But the point is that you need to think about that in terms of what makes sense in your process and how to harness the tools accordingly. Then we've got this idea of what kind of intelligence do we want? Now, these technologies are called artificial intelligence. I don't want to make loads of comments about that use of words right now, but I started thinking about this when I was at my daughter's school, and her headmaster was talking about AI in school context, educational contexts. And he was talking about what he was trying to foster in the pupils at the school was the idea of emotional intelligence, and that concept was really driving the way that they were going to discuss AI with the pupils. And that got me thinking about, well, what kind of intelligence do I want as a qualitative researcher? And for many of us, maybe not all of us, but for many of us, it's interpretive intelligence. And that's really why that methodological spectrum that I spoke about earlier is really important. What we mean by interpretation and interpretive processes, I think, varies across that spectrum, but it is relevant all the way across it. But that's why thinking about what it is that we want to do and how we want to do it is really important. And I think that brings us also onto the topic of the place of these tools, these technologies in our workflow. So are we wanting to replace what we've done previously with AI, or are we wanting to have AI to assist us in some way? And I think that's a really important consideration for us as researchers, but also I think the answer to that question underlies the way that the developers are implementing their tools. And I think it's worth just thinking about that when we look at tools and evaluate tools. And it also brings us back to the CAQDAS acronym that my colleagues coined all those years ago. And the A in CAQDAS is assisted, right? So going back to those debates and those cautions back in the day in the 80s, late 80s, when these software programs first came around, some of the concerns was about the computer taking over. And what we always said at the CAQDAS networking project is it's about what computer tools can do to assist us as researchers. And I think that that's still true now, right? And the way we think about these newer AI tools should be couched in that context as well. Which brings us off to thinking about how transparent are the tools, okay? So how much are we told by developers about what's going on underneath the hood of their software, okay? I think it's really important in evaluating whether they're useful to us, and also in talking about and justifying our use of them if we are going to use them, that we know that, okay? So how it's been implemented, why it's been implemented in that way, as well as how it works, are really, really important questions. So here's just a few things to ask ourselves before we use these in real settings. Are the tools we're using third party? So have they been developed specifically by the product we're using, or are they add-ons or buy-ins? Do the developers explain clearly and in detail how they work? How much input do you have as a researcher To what extent and how can you teach the tool and continually adjust it? And also something which I would love to spend more time thinking about is, can you use your research questions to inform the focus of the AI? At the moment, the answer to that question is largely not, either not at all or not enough. And I think it's until developers allow that to happen, or enable that to happen in a meaningful way, these tools will only ever be, look what's here, rather than focused, because when I code, I'm coding in when I code myself, I'm coding in the context of what my research questions are. At the moment, if the AI is doing the coding for me, it's not taking that into account in the same way. Okay, finally, ethics and potential dangers. So again, technically, okay, I think as qualitative researchers and as human beings, we need to understand how the language models that underlie generative AI have been developed. And that's something that when you delve into that topic, you might be quite shocked about what's going on, how those models and who is developing them. So you ought to be aware about that. You could read more about that in my blog post. Model collapse and the complete loss of interpretation. So this is to do with what happens to these models when there's so much AI generated content out there that they're training on that content rather than on human generated content. So the kind of idea that the more that we use these tools and the more that the results of those go back into the loop, then it's actually generating output based on output that isn't human generated in the first. And there's huge implications, I think, on that for qualitative analysis. And that also brings in the idea that, going back to the is the machine taking over thing, the risk, I think, of what we could call qualitative deep fake is that it's feasible that a qualitative research project could be entirely undertaken using AI without any human intervention or interpretation. So, for example, you could get AI to automatically transcribe your interviews, and then you may put that transcript into an AI tool that analyzes it, and both of those things could happen without any human checking. And then you could generate the output, and then somebody else could read that output by putting it into AI to summarize it. And then it's all that's the kind of the risk that we have to be aware of and be talking about and come up with ways to mitigate. Methodologically, do you have the right to upload participant data? Okay. You need to broker that consent if you're going to use these tools. And what are our responsibilities to our research participants? If you've asked people to talk to you about their experiences or opinions, then what are our responsibilities to them in terms of how we go about analysing their data? And what do they think about the use of AI for their data that they've given to you in the ways that they have? And finally, the idea about validity. Is it valid if we use AI? I think I saw something on Facebook yesterday, actually. Paul Dempster, some of you will remember Paul, who's come up with a logo called AI Free. This dissertation has been undertaken without the use of AI. And those kinds of disclosures and how we talk about the use of AI, if we are going to use it, are really, really important. Okay, that's all I really wanted to say at the moment. I am going to stop talking now, and I'm going to put this link into the chat and open it up for discussion. If anybody's got any questions, please feel free to open your audio and ask. Suzanne, I can see you. Any questions or reflections or comments?
Well, I can add a little bit to what you said.
Please do.
If or from based on my experience. And I think the most I'm maybe as a disclosure, I'm very enthusiastic, and I wasn't, my computer didn't want to start up, so that's why I was late coming in, didn't do your survey. Anyway, I would be scoring high on being very enthusiastic about this new technology. But I also think, it's not gonna be useful if we let AI do the stuff. But in a sense, if you think about it, there was automatic coding all the time, and it's the rubbish in, rubbish out, or garbage in, garbage out. That still applies, and that could have been done early as well. And now it maybe can be done on a different dimension. But if you use it as, I see it as like the extended brain, and then if you use it in, as also other people call it, the assistant, and what you also say, the A in the CAQDAS acronym, then I think it's very useful, and it's great. And that I've been testing, and then recently I have been testing it also for generating ideas for grounded theory, because the initial one was some posts I got from the Rudolf Schmidt, a German professor, has developed this method on metaphor analysis, and then he was very shocked what ChatGPT could do. It was just the beginning. It was, it's not replacing the expert, but it's kind of this initial brainstorming, and you can take it from there. And I just use when I teach, I always use a specific passage from my Joy and Happiness project. And then I was trying, what ChatGPT would be coming up with, and I needed to interfere. It was not like I was taking this this is the result of the analysis. But in the dialogue with ChatGPT, it was just helping me generating ideas, and it was then, and I think that's the important bit, to be the master of it, and to just say, this is the analysis, that, this is an interesting idea, I want to follow up on that, or it helps me to reflect. And so maybe I'll stop here.
I think that's really interesting, Susanna. You mentioned teaching, and I wonder what the implications are on university teachers in terms of teaching qualitative methods, to undergraduates, etc. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or anybody else who teaches who's here today.
Well, I think about what I'm doing with a workshop next week, on the 12th, 13th of the week after. It is in a sense like, showing people what's possible, but then I have kind of set it up also a bit of that we all can think together, but that is something I would also do with if I would teach in a bachelor study, to be a guide, let people try it out, and then discuss what the results are, so people can reflect on it. That's how I would approach the teaching, and showing people, it's not going to go away. This is going to be the future. And and then if you have some experience, guide it and learn together with your students.
So a bit like how we might teach manual coding, or through the use of software. There's a question from Heather. How do you see these in terms of reflexivity, particularly where lived experience forms part of the research questioning and the purpose? I think that was partly my point, Heather, about to what extent are the research questions taken into account. It's a similar thing, isn't it? So the way that we've constructed the questions that we've designed in our interview guide or focus group schedule, or whatever it is, and the way that we think about our role as researchers in the process, in terms of reflexivity, this definitely adds another layer to that, that definitely needs to be considered. And for me, transparent reflexivity, it's about being transparent about all of those things, whatever you include in your reflexive thinking throughout the whole process of doing a study, right from the outset right to the end. It's about being open about that and not hiding all of those considerations. And I think that this is part of that. I was talking to my son recently. He's about to be 16. And we were talking about AI, and I asked him, what do his friends at school think about that? And he said, I know he's got some friends who've done some of their homework using ChatGPT or something. And I asked him what he thought about that. And he was kind of like, well, I can't really be bothered to learn how to use it properly. By the time I've done that, I might as well just do the homework myself. And that's, really interesting to see how these kind of technologies change the way younger generations think about these things, and how that will infiltrate the way that research is happening. So in some ways, the opening up of research techniques through technology, I think, is a fabulous thing. Cesar is here. Hello. CAQDAS will be assisted forever and not changed by the new generations. What do you think about thinking not just on teaching? Cesar, do you want to open your audio?
Okay, sorry. It's nice to see you both. And I'm always trying to be connected. One of my basic concerns, this Christine, is I like your presentation a lot, and I like the way that you emphasize the A in CAQDAS acronym. But some of my teaching, when I'm doing training or working with PhD students, is that they are very confident about using artificial intelligence. And even just thinking on the way that our field is going, I'm trying to be very cautious, as you also said, right? So, and this just kind of thinking on the young people, the young students, the young researchers, that they will be using from the very beginning artificial intelligence tools, right? So what do you think about probably, I don't know, 50 years, the field of artificial intelligence will be still increasing the presence, not just in the business arenas, also in the whole life, I think.
Yeah. I think in the context of qualitative research and qualitative data analysis, outside of all of this AI, if we just think about qualitative software more generally, it's more than 30 years since these tools were first available. And there's still three camps, right? There's the advocates, the people who are using it and teaching it and have embedded it into their workflow. Many of us are here today. There's those who are still very skeptical. Okay, there's a whole bunch of researchers who are sitting on one particular end, the purest end of that methodological spectrum, who will never use tools. They like their digital tools. They like their highlighter pens. They want to do it with bits of paper. And what's going on now with generative AI will probably make those people even more skeptical about tools. But there's still quite a lot of people, and this is something that I would love to be able to change, that don't even know about it. So there's still many undergraduates who are learning about qualitative methods who are not taught about tools. And so I think with these newer generative AI tools, yes, they are here to say, what Suzanne says is absolutely true. And that's why we should be thinking about it and writing about it and talking about it and teaching about it. But I think that there will always be people who don't use them, probably because that variety of what is seen to be qualitative research and how we go about it will always be very, very varied.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. Is what I'm thinking is just like the old logician fear about the Chinese room, right? Something like, okay, we need interpretative intelligence, not artificial intelligence, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a really interesting website. I can't remember it. I'll look it up and send it to you all when I send the recording out next week, where you can a website where you can find headlines, like newspaper headlines from many decades ago about a new technology and how people were really worried about it, and thinking about how some of those technologies are now just everyday. So there's always this kind of horror, this kind of like skepticism about any new technology, isn't it? And the kind of adopters who get excited about these things, and the skeptics, and this is no different, I think. Okay, everyone, we've kind of gone over our time a little bit, but thank you all very much for being here. Don't forget Susanna's session. I don't know if you've still got space on your workshop or if it's full, but anyway, do tap into Suzanne on LinkedIn as well. She shares lots and lots of really interesting resources on qualitative research and tools, and keep your eyes out for more details about our symposium coming up in November and December, and we really hope that you'll all be there. That will be a longer time when we can hear from a variety of different people and really delve more deeply into these things. So thanks so much for being here, really appreciate it. If you have any further questions, just send me an email, and I'll be happy to answer by email. So please feel free to do that. I will give you my email address here. And those of you who woke up super early to be here, I appreciate it very much. It's lovely to see you all.